Sounds good.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Professor Brown Bag for all things stuttering. And we're just so happy to have Dr. Nan Ratner here with us today, and just someone that I admire and whose work I follow very closely. So she will be just giving us more information about the FluencyBank, how it started. And so I'll just turn it over to you, Nan, and just allow you to take it wherever you'd like.
Thanks. I'm a great fan of Spiro too. It's just it's a great organization, and the Brown Bag series sounds like I need to put it on my schedule actually. So I'm happy to be here and to be invited. By way of disclosure, I am the chair of the advisory board for the umbrella organization that FluencyBank is under, called TalkBank. I don't get any money for it, although I've been written onto some grants for creation and management of the banks and their resources. Anna Paula was asking, how does something like this even get started? And it started back in around the early 1980s. Catherine Snow at Harvard and Brian McWhinney at Carnegie Mellon became concerned that a lot of people were reinventing the wheel in child language development research. So, somebody would want to study when kids develop prepositions, and they'd gather 3 or 4 kids and they'd spend a lot of money and they'd look at that, and then the data would go into some unknown file cabinet, and then the next person would say, I want to know about negatives. And they'd go out and they'd grab some more kids. And so they had the notion that perhaps we could further language development research if we shared resources. And they went in and created something called CHILDIS, the Child Language Data Exchange System, which predated the internet. And they actually were librarians in a way that kept digital files of transcripts from Roger Brown and Dan Slobin and the like. And you could literally write them. There was no internet, very little email, and say, I need a digital copy of Brown's transcripts of Adam, Eve, and Sarah. Well, it got to be very popular, and the federal government did support it. The MacArthur Foundation, which many of you know about, started funding it originally. Then they got NSF money and NIH money, and it became a great success. And then somebody said, well, what about aphasia research? What about phonological development? What about second language acquisition research? And over the years, many other banks came into existence using some similar funding mechanisms, primarily the US NIH and NSF. And over the years, I kept saying to Brian McWhinney, we need something for stuttering, because we don't have data sharing in this field. We don't do that. So we tried over the course, it took probably 10 years when we did all the math to get federal support to start FluencyBank, which then became part of this bigger initiative called TalkBank, and I will walk you through the site. But after a while, there were so many banks that it became a bigger initiative called TalkBank. And we actually were very fortunate, after years of everybody saying no when we wrote proposals, in the same year, NSF and NIH said yes to the same proposal. And we were able to navigate joint funding to start FluencyBank. So that's how it got started. It's the newest bank. And so it has the fewest assets. Over the years, people moved from broadening their view of what the banks could do from just sort of archiving and preserving research to teaching. And some of the teaching resources are exquisite. Aphasia Bank, for instance, hosts literal grand rounds for the different types of aphasia. And you can really do some great teaching off of TalkBank itself. And I'm going to share my screen momentarily and walk you through that little bit of stuff. But my job today would be to sort of point out what you can do that's specific to FluencyBank for teaching, and then answer questions or concerns that you might have about it. So I think what I'll do first is I'm going to show you the main site. And so I'm going to share my screen. There we go. And I was on the FluencyBank site, so I think we'll do that. And we'll go to, there we go. Now you should be seeing the TalkBank site. Does everybody see that? I can drag this a little bit. Okay. All right. And the top of it. There it is. Basically, you log into talkbank.org. I want to emphasize that it is a nonprofit organization. It is multinational. Its assets contain data and support data from around the world. And I think I'm going to move this to this side. Thank you. So I can actually navigate the screen. And there are a number of things that are important to know about it generally, but they're less important for teaching. So the first thing I'll call your attention to these days, because it's going to become important, in fact, I forgot to check and see if I actually remember my login on this computer. I'm joking because I had to switch computers because of concerns about connectivity today. We now have, it used to be that you could open access everything without saying anything about who you are. Under new federal guidelines, we have to keep track not of who is accessing the data, but how many people are accessing the data in order to maintain our funding. And so now you need to get an account and log in when you even browse the free resources. It is free. It does not take your data and use it in any meaningful way other than to count unique users as a metric. So I'm going to sign in, and this will be the part where nobody remembers. Let's say if it remembers who I am, please, gosh. I never use my desktop anymore. And at that point, it will log me in. If it's green for you and you're not there, I went through that very fast, it will give you an option to establish an account. And it would just ask you to fill in your email and your name. That's basically it. And then all requests are basically approved. When we get to FluencyBank, there are some closed assets that are open only for research purposes. At this point, most of the research data in FluencyBank, it's ironic, but most of it comes from minor children. And a lot of it is audio and video recorded. So we insist that anybody who wants to use the research data, give us a reason for that. But for the teaching purposes, and I'm going to show you the teaching assets, you request an account and you just get it. That's it. Nobody really cares who you are. We figure people are not spending, recreational time at FluencyBank for evil purposes. Okay, before we leave this site, let me just point out a few things for your reference. One is that all of the transcripts up on this website are compliant with certain search features and analytical programs. So they're all in a particular format that you'll see. I'll show an example. They can be analyzed using the CLAN program. So you can actually do in-class exercises with students if you want to go that far. I'm going to stick to more basic stuff like acquainting students with the complexities of stuttering. But you can download the CLAN program for Windows, for Mac, or if you're really a geek, for Unix. There are 3 sets of manuals for people to understand how to use CLAN. There's the manual for how to transcribe, to make a file that is analyzable in CLAN, one for how to use CLAN, an SLP manual that Shelley Brundage and I wrote years ago we wanted to call it the Dummies Guide to CLAN and TalkBank. It's not really a Dummies Guide, but it is much shorter and cuts to the chase on the things that clinicians typically want. And then there are huge numbers of tutorial screencasts on how to use the system. I will cut very quickly to the fact that the list of the screencasts is 2 pages long. There's a second page of screencasts. Again, to cut to the chase for people in our field who have clinical kinds of interests and needs, there are 5 that are just for SLPs, and they're very short. They're only a little bit more than an hour to get through. And you don't need any of these for the teaching purposes. I just didn't want to leave the main site before sort of mentioning that we have those assets. Okay. So with that being said, are there questions about the main bank page? If you look down, you'll see how many banks there are at this point. At last count, there were 14. We are sort of the newest, largest one. by largest, I mean we have a federal funding to support us. We're closely tied with Right Hemisphere Bank as the most recent of the funded banks. So we're a baby. We're about 7 years old. Childis is well over 40 at this point. So like I said, it predates the internet. It predates personal computers and laptops. It's pretty weird. All right, so now I'm going to take you to FluencyBank. Okay, so FluencyBank, you can tell we don't spend a lot of money on graphic design. It's your tax dollars at work. So basically, this site has a number of different things. It will bring you back to things like the tutorial screencasts. It talks about how to contribute data, and you may want to consider doing that at this point. There is something called the index to corpora on every site that says what data sets are here and what are they about. Okay, and some of them will be closed and some of them will be open. And some of them that are related to fluency in other populations, like typical fluency, will tell you that they're not necessarily stored here. They're stored at one of the other banks just to avoid a lot of duplication. But we want to talk about teaching. So the teaching site has a lot of resources. The most popular resources that we have that people are using that I want to spend some time on are projects called Voices of Adults Who Stutter and Voices of Children Who Stutter. We collected those data here at the University of Maryland by collaboration with the National Stuttering Association and Friends, the organization of young people who stutter. And we call them out on each site. But let me just tell you a little bit before we go to them. The actual grant did not fund teaching resources because historically teaching resources came well after the research resources had been compiled. However, as we were waiting for funding to come through, we self-funded out of Maryland Resources tours of those two groups at their annual conventions, Friends Convention, NSA Convention, and we started to take interviews from people who stutter to try and mount a teaching site earlier than was historically done with TalkBank. Because there was this sense, at least I had the sense, Brian McWhinney doesn't really work in stuttering, that we don't have enough fluency specialists working at our universities and the training programs. And so it's possible for students to go through an entire program and never see a real person who stutters and only get their education out of a textbook. And as Anna Paula knows, some of those textbooks are pretty awful. And so we wanted to try and bring clients to the students at various programs. And so I'll start with the Voices of Adults Who Stutter, which is where we started. And what we have is we, with the help of Vivian Siskin, we got approval both from the organizations we were visiting and also from our IRB to interview adults who stutter and ask them a set of standard questions about stuttering so that they were all talking about the same thing. To prevent these interviews from simply being random, where all that really linked them was the stuttering, and so they could get used in, we thought, less informative ways, like people would be assigned to count the stutters or whatever. We made the questions about the A's and the C's of stuttering. So we definitely concentrated on things like the impacts of stuttering on daily life. We had fun asking individuals what they thought caused stuttering. We also had collected in the interviews questions about what their past therapy experiences were like. We thought that young clinicians would perhaps get something out of that. And also to define what they thought success in communication would look like. And we were hoping that they wouldn't say, if I don't stutter, it's a great day. And given where we were collecting these samples, there is actually a bias towards opposite responses, that they are not highly fluency focused. but some aren't. The last question was, what else would you want to say to students or the general public to help them learn about stuttering? We also got permission, and again, I want to acknowledge help when I get it, because my life is due to the graciousness of people around me. Scott Yaris and Bob Queasel, late Bob Queasel, also gave us permission to administer a specially mocked up copy of the Oasis to each person, and most people did complete them. Shelley Brundage has been doing research on this data set, because you can, for various purposes, and not every person returned their Oasis, and we tried hounding them, but not everybody has one. But the vast majority of individuals do have completed Oases that are matched to their interview. And then a year in, again, I want to thank somebody. Aileen Chu had been looking at the beta version of this project and said, if you had them read something, we could score an SSI on these guys as part of class experiences. So we actually wrote to ProEd, I think it's ProEd, the publishers of the SSI, and said, can we use your reading passages? And they said, oh, funny you should ask. We never got permission to use these reading passages. They're out in the public domain, but sure. And so we have a series of reading exercises for the adults and the children. The vast majority of the adults are reading the Friuli passage from the SSI. In some cases, they're not. We had a couple of adults who literally could not read aloud for various reasons. They just froze. And so we gave them options to read other Friuli passages. For the children that I'll introduce you to, they got grade appropriate reading passages from the SSI. So it is possible to do a full assessment at some level of participants in this data set and each student, as you'll see, can pretty much have their own client. So what we'll do first is show you what happens if you browse it. And feel free to raise a hand or say anything. Oh, so here's why I have to move this guy back over here. Okay, so the data set is basically you have the interviews, and then you have, if I go back, you have the reading passages. They're kept separate, but they are associated with the same labels. And on request, we had given, like good scientists, we had given each participant a random number as a participant. And the first generation of instructors who tried using them said, this is absolutely infuriating. We can't go through and figure out what's going on here. Can you try something else, like their age and their gender? So that's what we have here. So a 20F is a 20-year-old female. And when you see something like a C or a D or an A or a B, it means that we had more than one male or female at that particular age level, and we put a suffix on them. And the browsable transcripts are just what they sound like. They're a transcript that you can see and play online. So I'm just going to go here to a 26-year-old female who is familiar to me, and maybe some of you know who this is. And everybody who signed a consent form for this project, including the children I'll show you later, agreed to be on the open internet. And they signed up to do this even before the feds made us actually take any indications of who was clicking onto the site. So there is no problem here with confidentiality. We had one request a couple of years ago for somebody to take down her interview. She looked at it again and decided she felt very vulnerable and wanted it taken down. We took it down immediately. We will do that with all of our websites. If somebody has, even if they've properly consented, we will not keep something up there that people are not comfortable with. So you don't need to worry about this. In terms of the participants' sort of consent to be used for classroom teaching or discussion. And so what happens here, if you look, you have a video screen right here. And If you go down, you know a little bit about this particular person, including the original transcriber. I want to point out that the goal for the original transcribers was not to do a faithful verbatim coding of what happened. It was envisioned that some instructors would want students to kind of appreciate the sample for its fluency characteristics. And so these are minimally coded for fluency. If they stick in some fillers like or you may find them, but you will not find too many examples of the actual stutters coded in. That's because we thought the instructors might want to discuss that. In my long history of teaching, I'm now in my 42nd year here at the University of Maryland. I like to joke that I started in kindergarten. I have had, there is one person up on the site, before we end, I'll show you Tom, who many of you have seen me give discussions of in small venues. He's an old client of mine, and he gave a 2.5-minute interview passage that he allowed me to use for years at meetings and with my students to look at stuttering. In 42 years, it's a 260 word sample, and I would ask students to compute, you know, some fluency statistics on it, and Vivian Siskin used it after that. The disagreement was wild enough to really create its own topic of conversation. So one of the things I'll point out to you is we now have, I think the count is 40 adults, 40 unique adults are in this particular directory. And it doesn't look like it here, but there's a lot. And I will check and see why it doesn't look like that right now. So students can either do their own, they can do them in pairs. You can have one that everybody does. There are a lot of different ways to go about this, depending upon what your goal is. And we'll talk about that. But I want to emphasize that there is no early on, we had instructors ask us for an answer key. And I think one of the points I would make is that fluency is a highly subjective experience. And what you would do for a research project and what you do for clinical purposes, both in terms of what your goals are for people, as well as, you know, what is the clinical difference between 10% stuttered words and 14, you know, or things like that. There are a lot of reasons why we're going to kind of reject some sort of answer key to what's going on with these people fluency wise. I don't have time to talk about it specifically, but there is a lot of documentation at the main TalkBank site for a new utility called collaborative commentary. Collaborative commentary allows you, for any of the TalkBank assets, to go in and establish a group to look at a single transcript or a small bunch of transcripts and make comments line by line or do group discussion based on them. It's sort of beyond, again, the time we have today to do this, but I strongly urge you to look into it. The NSF funded that just last year or the year before. Brian McWhinney is very proud of it. And that would be a great place for people to look at doing group projects with a single transcript. Yeah, Anna Paula.
And I had to turn my camera off because it keeps telling me that I have an unstable connection. So
I know,
just
that's the phrasing I was so desperately trying to prevent.
I had a question that came in just privately here. So I thought it might be a good time to insert the question is, are we able to search videos for specific stuttering, like if you're wanting to see more disfluencies versus blocks versus this or that?
You're going to have to go through a few and click them. And this is where I should probably show you that you can tell what's going on pretty quickly. So if I like this lady and want to listen to her, all I do is I start by clicking that. Let me make sure it's louder. Sorry.
A little restaurant. I have to admit that when I travel, history is not the first thing on my mind. Food and wine are, and that's what sold me on Friuli. It's famous as a source of some of Italy's best white wines. He what? I'm merely in search of wines, unaware that we soon would make a culinary detour.
Okay, so she's reading. I'm going to take us back to the interviews, which are more interesting, but I had, gone to that directory. So what you notice is that it plays, the video goes along with it. Everything is highlighted. There are search functions for these particular videos. The reading will not get you as far as other things because everybody's reading the same passage. But for instance, if we go to the interview, I don't know if that was her. I don't remember who I had. No, it's a different person. But basically, if you can sort of remember, the goal would be to click on these things and go down them really quickly. People kind of show themselves profile-wise fairly quickly. They're only about 10 minutes long a piece. They're not very long. And so one of the things you could do is it's possible to search things like and I can show somebody how to do that. But I would strongly encourage actually that if you're an instructor, you just kind of click on these things, go down and make some notes about the people you think sort of best exemplify various things, because they're all very different and they answer questions very differently. One of the things that's already been ascertained by some groups, including Shelley Brundage, is that there is a complete remarkable dissociation from the things they put down on their OACs and what they do during the interviews, for instance, which is going to be one of the suggested activities, is that what you view as severity, might have to change, what severity of what, right? Because the frequency of behaviors is often pretty unlinked to some of the impacts that the people report or the emotions that they tell you about when they're doing these interviews, for instance. Just before I get off the topic of frequency, however, there will be, coming up this year, there will be an opportunity in a sense to know in advance which of the participants have the most disfluent samples, if that were really something of interest to people. What we're discovering is that the most frequent use of the teaching site, this is just wild, and Brian and I are still wrapping our heads around it, is by engineers. There are now, yeah, I know, I can see Kat's face. So what's going on is that engineers discovered this was an open access repository, and it was completely open until this past year when the feds made us at least make people sign up for accounts. And they were busy, lots of people, for either money or for altruistic reasons, are trying to develop better automatic speech recognition systems that will respond to different types of speakers. And this is the largest existing repository of speech from people who stutter. There are some others. There are some people who've completely downloaded Stutter Talk, for instance, and they use it. But for instance, Pete Howell's old UClass data set has very few people comparatively, and they're tiny, like a couple of sentences long. And there is no transcription that goes along with it. What we've discovered is that it's not very helpful for every engineer on Earth to be recoding these data from scratch. And many of them have been doing that. So because we never annotated them reliably for disfluency, everybody's either doing it themselves or they're not doing it, in which case the algorithms are kind of trashy because they don't match the transcripts anymore. So we are this year going to make a gold standard version of these transcripts that are more faithfully annotated for the disfluencies. And we're going to have them under lock and key for the engineers. If there is some reason why you would like to know, for instance, which participants have different profiles, we can run the program FluCalc on these samples once they're all done, and we'll have a pretty good idea. And we may post that information back up to the teaching site, sort of like for people who are interested in participants who show a lot of blocking, for people who are interested in folks who have a lot of fillers, we'll try and provide some more generic information for instructors on which of these many lovely interviewees is best if you're trying to illustrate a particular function. But all of these will play by themselves. We tried very hard to get a large array of different types of people at different ages and different backgrounds and different philosophies. Some will be familiar to people who hang out at meetings of various sorts. So it does give people a chance. Yeah, there's a lot of them. And it basically, again, they play. So you can play them in class, or you can assign them for people to play at home.
I think it used to impact me much more. It used to keep me from doing a lot of activities I wanted to do, and I would say that changed probably around mid-high school time. Maybe
So what's
college.
nice for illustration is if you find something you like, you can figure out where it is for teaching purposes in the file. It will highlight as it plays, so it has a way of orienting people's eyes toward it. And the other thing you can do is you can go all the way back. There, sorry. So that's the browsable function. You can bring them all down and play with them on your own local computer. You can download the media, you can download the transcripts, and the OACs are there separately. It just sort of gave me this big zip folder. And here are all the OACs. And just as an example, keep moving you guys around. There we go. And you know, here's an example from somebody, and it is coded back to that person's age and gender. So you can go and go back and find them. And they're specially marked. You know, we were trying to be very nice and not have, this was almost 10 years ago now, not have Scott lose all of the money that people might spend buying copies of the OACs, because there were, you know, ones up there on the internet that people could bring down. Okay, so that's what goes on with the voices of adults who stutter. Let me just go back and, whoops. Hello. How do I get back to where I was? Oh, because it decided to do something different. Okay, so you can bring them down. If you bring the transcripts down, what will happen is they will come up as pretty much garbage if you don't download Clan and open them inside Clan on your local computer. So for teaching, you may want to first play with using the browsable stuff, and then think about, you know, if you really are more into it or you have experience using for Clan for research, bringing them down and showing students how to code them on their local laptop. And I'm going to change screens for just a second to quickly show what that would look like. So if you had, this is a very different transcript I just opened up because I'm doing a different project right now. But there is, for instance, a function. If the student had repeated this word, for instance, we can do window special characters. You can insert various fluency codes inside an existing transcript, so students can annotate an existing transcript and then run the FluCalc program, which we talk about on the videos for FluencyBank. But I'm going to presume that students are not going to do that, because in many classes, spending that time to teach them that utility takes time away from more valuable things, which is why I like the browsable function. And you can, for instance, discuss, if you want to print out a transcript, how you would annotate a transcript for fluency. And if students are more interested, or you have an advanced course, yes, you can talk about how to take a transcript, start putting fluency codes in. The fluency codes are all meant to be used around the world. And so they are symbol-based. They're things like mathematical operators, and not things like we've had to transfer many existing repositories that we have, like we have the Illinois Stuttering Research Project data up at FluencyBank. We have a new body of data from Jean Sawyer. We have Stacy Wagovich. We have my stuff. All of those had to convert from using things like PWR for a part word repetition to using symbols that could be used in other languages, because PWR is very English. And so there are universal codes that the SLP Guide to Clan explains. There's a little chart. It's very handy, 1 page, how to put them in. If you want to go there, it's not that hard to do. And I would refer you first to the SLP Guide to Clan and the section that talks about how to do fluency coding, and the film for how to do fluency coding inside Clan that is under the 5 SLP videos. It's, again, very short, and then shows you how to run the computations. But there are other things you can do with these videos that I don't get much opportunity to talk about the other things you can do with these videos, so I'd like to just do that. So quickly, if we go back, we then got permission to do voices of children who stutter. And these children are a little bit older, but they have browsable transcripts. They start by age 8, and they go to age 18. We also have a lot of them. Okay. And so you can sort of see, we start with an 8-year-old girl who I think I remember her. Oh yeah, she's not 8 anymore. I see her a lot these days. And she shows up at a lot of meetings in our field. And we go all the way up to kids who were arguably pretty much adults. We had to decide whether to treat them as minors or not. They are asked a similar set of questions, but not an identical set of questions. They also are doing reading, and they basically filled out the child version of the OACs and did child SSI reading. So the questions for the kids were these. Tell me about the things you've been doing at the meeting so far. Do you know why your family came? Have you met kids here? Can you tell me about your talking? What have you learned about stuttering? And if you've had therapy, is there anything you'd like a therapist to know? And the kids got very, very exercised in many cases about that. The sign used to recruit them said, "Give a therapist a piece of your mind." And that signed up a lot of teenagers. So we have activities here and elsewhere. So let me just go through, because these activities look an awful lot the same. So we can, of course, practice with fluency assessment. You know, what do you hear? What do you see? And that's true of all these data sets. They can practice actually completing an SSI, because they can see the client, and they can get at some of the other behavioral features of stuttering. They can practice with the OACs. I meant to say the OACs are completed, they are not scored. Okay, so the student must score them. That was done deliberately. So the individual circled the responses. They didn't always, just like in real life, they didn't always answer all the questions. And so you have to know how to score an OACs in order to do an appropriate OAC scoring on these. Then you can, as with the adult, practice contrasting. You know, what are you seeing versus what are they reporting? Okay, what is the difference between their talking and their oral reading? In some cases with the adults, it's remarkable, and it's the same way for the kids. You know, are there threads in the questions? Do some kids answer similarly? Do people answer differently? So you can go down question by question. You know, what's the kind of advice that students have? What's the kind of experiences that they've had? And then you can compare across the adults and the children to sort of see if some themes are emerging that are different. A lot of the adults do frankly talk about not coming to grips with their stuttering until they are much older. And they have seen, given where we got them, they've seen sea changes in how stuttering is treated. Having said that, I could get some money betting nickels for the surprising number of people at NSA who came in and said, "I really thank the therapist who gave me good fluency shaping skills." So these are not homogeneous, even though there should have been an enormous bias in what people responded, given where we found people. But that's not necessarily true. There is diversity of opinion. And if you go down the transcripts and you look, that's the other nice thing about having transcripts. You can sort of read ahead of time and sort of see what people are saying, so that if you want to pull out some themes, you can do that. In the interest of time, I'm going to take you back to the general teaching page. We have a couple of adults who clutter. They're just hard to find. The International Cluttering Association gave us a really complicated protocol, and very few people have done it. I think that we've got 3. Okay. But they're adults, and they're there to take a look at a contrast. We have some teaching videos that Glenn Tellis gave, but they weren't appropriately consented. And so if you want to take a look at them, they are password protected. If you write to you're asked if you need access to things, you're given a contact person. It used to be me and Brian. Now we have an assistant for all of TalkBank who helps answer some of these access questions. You can write me directly. Anybody I know who teaches, I'm going to give them access to Glenn's stuff, but it's not a simple just log in, get a free account, go there, get it, because they needed to be protected against the open network. Shelley spent a lot of time doing some exercises. She loves pedagogy, and she spent a fair amount of time suggesting activities. They download as separate activity documents, but we have that. We have a link to Vivian Siskin's channel. We have a link to the Spiro assets. Okay, if you want more there, Ana Paula, I'm not sure how specific that link was, but the minute you asked for it, we put it. If any of you know of good assets that should be up here, we can do that. It's possible, for instance, that we would all benefit from having a Stutter Talk link here and some other kinds of groups. We do have some other activities that people have been developing over the years. When they tell me about them, I ask them immediately if it went well, if you think it's a good activity, can we post it here? So that brings me at 45 minutes after the hour. And I thought I might stop here and sort of answer some questions from you all, or maybe bounce some ideas. I remind you that some of the things that we put up there came from people who taught, saying, wow, wouldn't it be good if you could do X? And then we immediately went out and tried to do X. It's not hard for us to cobble together resources to do some stuff. One of the things we're most looking for, and lots of groups have promised us, but they haven't come through, is for the questions we ask the adults, for instance, to be done in self-help groups for people who stutter in other language communities. So we would like to have Spanish-speaking assets here in the United States. We would love to have assets from groups. We know that there are international self-help groups that meet on a regular basis in other countries. The Oasis is translated into other languages. These days, I used to joke that you had to find somebody to at least transcribe the stuff for us before we could put it up. We don't need to do that anymore. We actually have web-based transcription that works in something like 50 languages. Now, it won't be perfect, particularly if the people stutter, but we can generate a linked first approximation of that interview that wouldn't be very hard to fix. And I often can find the resources to fix stuff pretty quickly. That goes pretty fast with a linked transcript. If one word is off or a couple of words are off, that's pretty easy to fix. You've all seen people fixing the Zoom transcripts. But starting from scratch, that's like, we don't have those assets. So if you know of people, and maybe this October I can make a plea during Stuttering Awareness Month, that we would love to have this protocol, the one for the adults, in other language communities. And we finally think with the web-based transcription and parsing service that we have going that works in multiple language communities. We actually think we have a shot at it at this point, because lots of people were willing to collect interviews, but we couldn't make those transcripts from them. That was sort of beyond our capacity. And the groups that were trying to gather them sat and thought, well, we don't have anybody who can do it at our end either. And so I think that we'll start to see better assets if we can get the interviews done. And I keep thinking it's a nice activity for a self-help group at a meeting to go through and just chat about those questions. And literally, they can be videoing one another on cell phones. We don't need sophisticated equipment for this. And we have consent forms and we can translate them and things like that. So I'm going to stop here and ask if you have questions or ideas or suggestions.
I'm going to just respond to Jessica's question, and then if anybody else wants to add. She asked, how have you all used FluencyBank already if you are using it in your class? So one way that I've done it, and I did have to go and find which video options I wanted to highlight, but I chose, X number of videos, and I had them listen and really just explore, right, the different stuttering patterns where they are just observing and just really calibrating to stuttered speech, right? And what does that look like? What does it sound like? All of those things. And then just discussing and kind of talking through, what surprised you or what was familiar to you, those kinds of questions. And then as far as fluency counts, I don't put a lot of weight on fluency counts in evals, but as an instructor, I do feel like I do need to teach students how to do so. But I always, always, always preface it to say it's one snippet in time. It has, in my view, limited value, and this is why. Depending on the situation. And really my goal is just to get students able to listen to stuttered disfluencies and just to pick up on the patterns. That's really what I'm after, is can they pick up on the stuttering pattern, whether it be, reps or prolongations or blocks or whatever. I'm not as concerned about exact percentages because gauging impact is obviously primary. But we talk about those things, and I use the videos and the reading passages for that purpose. And one more thing I've done is making sure that I'm picking or assigning videos, or at least, choosing kind of whatever my selection of videos is that I'm leading them to, is having them compare how the frequency of stutters correlate with the impact scores or not, right? My point is obviously to show that sometimes we see frequent visible disfluencies with minimal impact. And then of course the opposite can be true, where we see what might be minimal or less visible disfluencies, or maybe that are, less frequent or tense or whatever, but then the impact that the individual is experiencing is significant. And this, of course, becomes more applicable to covert stuttering, which sometimes, opens the door to that conversation. So that's how I've used it, is just really calibrating students to stuttered speech, having them, be able to talk about stuttered patterns or what they're observing, and then how that sometimes can or cannot affect, how they're experiencing their stutter.
Yeah, that is very cool. While you were doing that, I also reminded myself to, if you're really interested in a short exercise on fluency counts and subjectivity, I highly recommend my friend Tom, who looks like he came straight out of Boogie Nights, because he probably did. He was gathered in the mid-1980s, and he has a less than 3-minute sample, of which I do some of the talking. And he packs a lot of wallop into those 2 minutes in terms of affective and cognitive components, strangely enough. So there's a lot of reflecting on his past experiences and a lot of behavior. And you can, for instance, we have a version of this that doesn't have the fluency coded in it, but what I used to do is simply, and you can still do this, you can download just the video, give it to the students, hand it out. It's a very short video, or put it up on your Elm site or whatever. and then ask them to transcribe it because it has fewer than 300 words in it, and ask them to sort of talk about the disfluency. And what you will see is this remarkable difference amongst students' judgments, to the extent he doesn't have an OASIS or an SSI or anything like that, but he just, in terms of counts, you get everything from making him look pretty mild, which I disagree with kind of vehemently, to looking highly involved, which I tend to agree with more, and his cognitive components are frankly a little bit alarming, and they were at the time when he came into the University of Maryland. And so I highly suggest sort of both to put frequency counts into some perspective, like how important are they, right? And how well do we agree on them, right? He's just a really efficient little teaching resource, and sending people home, they can get them transcribed in a couple, in an hour or so for a homework assignment, and then they can compare their notes. And it's really, you know, it's a better use in some sense than going down person by person by person. I view the interviews with the adults and children as being more holistic appreciation, more holistic evaluation, because they give you so much more to look at. So they've got longer interviews, they've got more they're chatting about, they're reading, they're filling out the OASIS. You really can do what I would consider to be a much better rounded evaluation. It's not really an evaluation, but it's as close as we're going to get in lots of places where people don't have folks who stutter walking in and out of the clinic every day. So, it's way better than those avatars from that company that will not be named. So, it's real people.
Thank you. Anybody else have something that they want to share about how they've used it or other ideas?
I can share. That's okay.
Sure. I'm really anxious to know because, again, we want to keep improving the site.
Yeah, I mean, I've gotten a lot, even though I have used this tool before in my classes, today's presentation was really helpful, and I have like new ideas of how to expand. So thank you.
Maybe I could write an article. I haven't done that.
But how I have used it up till now is just in my mind, I'm almost just like really slowing down the evaluation process. Like 1 week I might pick one client on here, say like a 24-year-old female or whatever. And then like in class we'll work on just, for example, maybe just the fluency count piece for like that week. Then that same client, I'll use her again. Let's just listen to her in an interview and talk about what the cognitive and affective and behavioral components are. And like just almost like look at that, like zooming in on that piece. And then maybe we can listen to the reading another time. And like then like helping the students at the end, like in real life, this is all like maybe 1 or 2 sessions you're rushing through, but like really like diving into each. And then at the end, having them say, okay, and the OASIS would be another session, right? But anyway, at the end, you put it all together. And then from that, have them generate, if this was your client, what would be your recommendations? What would be your goals and why? So I have found it really useful in that way, that we can really, instead of like a client in the clinic who maybe you only have for a half hour and you're rushing, to like really be able to take our time with each piece.
That's really good. And if you have a template of an assignment that you're willing to share, we give, full credit to whoever throws that up there. And you get actually a DOI. It's like a pub, right? It winds up in a digital object.
I don't have one of those yet, so maybe I'll be motivated
yes,
just so I can say I've done that.
Yeah, and we are still taking additions. If people have cases that they think are interesting, the protocol is still active, and we're able to let you interview, more people. If you think you have somebody who'd make a great addition to this this particular initiative, talk to me. We'll make it happen at some point.
Anyone else?
So the students themselves will have to get accounts unless you bring some of the materials down. Okay. So, and again, it won't take very much time. Okay. What the new person administering it would prefer is if you have a class roster and can send it along as you ask for permission, then they don't have to keep going back and forth with the inevitable student who waits until the day before an assignment to get access. And they'll just sort of automatically approve emails, because that's the authentication system. You know, the way that they know the user is by the email account that they use. So if you are teaching and you want to be sure it's seamless, talk to the contact person, Abby or me, and send a list of the students and their emails, and that will make things go really clickety click, because that's all she does at this point.
And is that email address easily
Yes.
searchable?
Let me go back and show you where it is. It is on the main part of FluencyBank. So where is it? Abigail Medvick. Yeah, I should tell her to highlight that. Okay. So contact information is there. Again, whenever anybody has a real problem, they can just email me, because Abby will, if she has any questions, just email me. And yes, I'm gonna, you know, my skip the middleman kind of stuff.
Wonderful. I did not know about this option to email her with our class roster. So this is
That
great.
is sort of all new. It's been happening. Just to sort of, you know, who wants to go into politics here? But we have a lot of things that that is a statement that now has to be on any federally funded website. It looks pretty scary. But the other issue is there's a lot of accountability, particularly when you have electronic assets. They want to know, you know, is anybody using them? How many people are using them? You know, how do you vet who's using them? You know, it's like this is not going to make the difference in the balance of power and the great powers, but you know, we have to be compliant. And when we try and go back and get maintenance funding, you know, we need to check off the boxes. So that's
Wonderful.
why it's become more, you know, now that people have to get an account, the first thing everybody thought about is, oh my God, classes. What are we going to do about classes? And so the suggestion was just send along a roster, and that'll make it a one-step deal.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, this has been wonderful and so helpful. And we're just really thankful for you being here today. And if you have or come up with activities or ways to use FluencyBank, do send it Nan's way, because this is how we
Yeah.
help each other.
Can I ask a very fast final question in the last 30 seconds? Would it be helpful to write an article about this? And maybe put it in, I don't know, perspectives or something that's easily accessible?
Yes.
Okay. I can
Anything that
probably find some time to do that.
Nan, I was going to say too how wonderful the podcast episode from the Stuttering Foundation about Shelley's work. Oh, and forgive me, our amazing graduate student she partnered with, but they referenced using FluencyBank and
Yeah, all of a sudden I'm blanking too, and I know who she
yeah.
is. This is
Oh my
terrible.
gosh,
Yeah.
Kerrigan. Yeah, Kerrigan. And I
Yeah.
actually had my students listen to that podcast episode as well as use FluencyBank. But yeah, like so just a little plug.
Yeah. Well, let me see if I can, especially because some of it now is people may be put off by the login problem space, so it might be good for me to go and sort of provide some sort of reference. When I went to NSA this summer, I was a little surprised that a lot of it, there was a session where a lot of teachers showed up. Only one person had heard of FluencyBank. And I was
So hopefully YouTube, Sparrow's YouTube channel can promote to more and more.
so yeah.
And it'll be awesome. Thank you so
All right.
much.
Well, thank you, ladies. Have a good have a good Monday afternoon. Better than my Monday morning traffic experiences.